The priesthood of all believers is a topic that is very relative to our nation. And one thing that we oftentimes don't associate this movement with is education. When we think of the priesthood of all believers, Martin Luther is probably the person that pops into your mind, and you would be correct because he is what we deem the father or the beginning kind of notion of the movement. But we're going to kind of discover today that, of course, this movement did not stop simply with the Protestant Reformation. When we look at Martin Luther and we look at his influence, the first thing we think about is the 95 Theses. Now, down below on the PowerPoint slide, I have two simple things that are listed there, not necessarily concerning the 95 Theses, but some implications from it. When we think of the 95 Theses, these were the charges that were brought against the Catholic Church. Luther posted them on the church door. And one of his biggest topics, or one of his biggest arguments, was the selling of indulgences. Priests were handing out pardons for sins, and this was very egregious, especially when concerning scripture. Now, the second thing I have that was below our selling of indulgences is the Crusades. Pope Urban II is going to convince Christians to take back the Holy Land, take back Jerusalem from the Muslims, right? And of course, we all know how that turned out. It did not go to just simply one war, it was a debacle. Now, the reason I bring these two topics up because they are prime points of the result that we are going to look for. And of course, what is the purpose of the priesthood of all believers? The goal, and this is where we're going to go, and what Martin Luther was advocating for was universal literacy. Guys, when we talk about the priesthood of all believers, it isn't simply, okay, we're going to go to school and that be that. We have to remember that knowledge is power. When someone is simply telling you what to believe or what something says, i.e., in this case, the Bible, the people simply had to take their word for it. Unfortunately, this does not always work out very well. During this time period, Latin was the language, of course, of the scripture, and the common tongue was not Latin. And so it would be as if I walked into a Russian school without me having any inclination of speaking Russian. I wouldn't get much out of it. And number two, I would have to be very trusting of the people there to guide me in the right direction. So, this is our movement. What's the importance? The importance are three things down below. Number one is universal literacy. As stated before, the idea of thinking for oneself, having your own mind. And this is what leads to our second notion here is mass education. How do we get literacy, right? Well, what was the movement, or how do we ensure this happens? Mass education became a mainstay. Now we're going to take years before it becomes, law passing and things like that, but the movement will initiate. Now, the third thing and the most important, and what I believe Martin Luther's whole goal was the ability to think for oneself. When you allow someone to dictate your thought process, you are controlled by them. And the whole idea was, of course, for Martin Luther, was to read the scripture for yourself. Know God for yourself, not because someone told you. And this, of course, is his main movement. Now, the question is, where does it go from education? Now, down below, we have the father of education in America, Horace Mann, the founder of the Common School. One thing that he advocated for was the public school system, education equality. He earnestly believed that education was the great equalizer. This is during the time of segregation. This is during the time of, we're talking slavery, we're talking immigration, Native Americans, right? Reservation. This whole movement that was in turmoil, and man not only was a champion for the minority, but also of women's rights as well. He was a extreme reformer. If you look at his quote down below, it states, "Lost yesterday sometime between sunrise and sunset, 2 golden hours, each said with 60 diamond minutes. No reward is offered, but they are gone forever." It's the idea of his urgency. When we look at his urgency, we see the importance that man put upon education and really the priesthood of all believers. We see this movement, and although this is years apart, we see the influence from Martin Luther's theory in the Protestant Reformation, even in our schools today. This is why we educate. This is why we preach literacy. This is why we preach thinking for yourself. Thank you.